Story 1. The man in the storage unit. The storage facility smelled like dust and old metal. Jenna wrinkled her nose as she stepped into the narrow hallway of corrugated doors, dragging a box behind her. She had spent all morning packing her dorm room, and now she just needed a place to stash her things for the summer. The man at the front desk, wiry, balding, and with teeth the color of weak tea, had smiled too widely when she asked about availability. Unit 47, he said. End of the hall, good price for a student. Don't mind the smell, just been shut up for a while. He handed her a key and a rusty padlock. Unit number 47 was tucked in a dim corner, half hidden from view. When Jenna rolled up the door, a wave of warm, stale air hit her. She coughed. The smell wasn't just dust. It was heavier, sour, almost like spoiled meat. She told herself it was probably just a dead rat in the wall. Still, unease prickled along her arms as she stacked her boxes inside. The first week she visited a couple of times to drop off more items. Each time, she noticed strange little things. A corner of a tarp folded differently than she remembered. A faint metallic clink from inside when she hadn't touched anything. Once, she thought she heard a soft tapping from inside as she approached. When she rolled up the door, the sound stopped. She told herself she was imagining it. By mid-June, Jenna hadn't been back for 2 weeks. When she finally returned, the padlock was hanging loosely on the latch, not clicked shut. Her stomach tightened. She always locked it. Inside, she found a few objects that weren't hers. A single child's sneaker with frayed laces, a torn men's t-shirt, and a handful of Polaroids scattered across the top of one of her boxes. The pictures were of strangers sleeping. Some were in bedrooms, others on couches. In all of them, the angle was close, as if the photographer had been standing right beside the sleeping person. She stormed to the office, slamming the photos on the counter. The manager frowned at them for a long moment, then shrugged. Must be leftovers from the last tenant. I told you this unit hadn't been cleared in a while. That doesn't explain the lock, she snapped. Maybe you forgot to close it. Jenna left with her skin crawling. That night she dreamed of someone standing in her dorm, breathing heavily while she slept. 2 weeks later, she stopped by the unit after a late shift at work. It was past midnight, the air outside thick with summer heat. The facility was deserted, the long rows of units stretching away into darkness. When she reached number 47, she froze. From behind the door came slow, steady breathing. Not the muffled hum of pipes or the creak of settling metal, but deliberate, human breaths. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She told herself it had to be her imagination, that she'd only hear silence when she lifted the door. She forced herself to fit the key into the padlock and twist. The lock popped open. She rolled the door up. In the back of the unit, hunched in the shadows, was a man. His skin was stretched thin over sharp cheekbones, his clothes filthy and clinging to his wiry frame. His eyes glittered in the dim light as his lips stretched into a slow smile. "Hi, Jenna," he whispered. Her mind went blank. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, dropping her keys. The man unfolded himself from the corner and took one slow step toward her. She turned and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the front office, where she locked herself in the bathroom and called 911. When the police arrived, they dragged him out of the unit. He didn't fight, didn't speak, just smiled. In the harsh fluorescent light, Jenna saw that his nails were long and caked with dirt, his hair matted in greasy clumps. An officer told her later that he had been living in that unit for months, slipping out at night through a gap in the fence to steal food. His phone, found in a plastic bag under her boxers, contained hundreds of photos. Most of them were of her, sleeping in her dorm bed, brushing her teeth, eating breakfast in her kitchen. The timestamps dated back weeks before she had even rented the storage unit. Jenna moved out of her apartment the next day. She never went back to collect her things from number 47. The facility closed 3 months later, but sometimes, when she walks home at night, she swears she hears slow, steady breathing just behind her. Story 2. The last bus. Mark hated late shifts. By the time he clocked out from the convenience store, the streets were deserted, and the only bus that still ran this far out was the last one at 12:45 a.m. that night. The rain was relentless. His jacket was soaked through in minutes, and the empty bus stop offered no shelter. He checked his watch. 12:40. Just 5 more minutes. Through the curtain of rain, headlights appeared, but they didn't belong to the usual city bus. This one was older, paint faded to a dull cream, windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. The route sign above the windshield was blank. The bus screeched to a stop in front of him, the doors folding open with a metallic groan. The driver didn't greet him. In fact, the driver didn't even look at him. Mark hesitated. The farebox was missing, replaced by an empty metal plate. The seats inside looked worn and sunken, their fabric a deep red that reminded him faintly of dried blood. Still, it was pouring, and his apartment was 3 miles away. He stepped on, shaking off water. The passengers sat perfectly still. Every single one wore a hood or hat pulled low, obscuring their faces. No one moved. No one even shifted in their seat as the bus lurched forward. Mark found an empty seat near the middle and pulled out his phone, but the screen stayed stubbornly black. Dead battery. The city lights thinned as the bus took a turn Mark didn't recognize. Instead of heading toward the main road, they wound through narrow back streets lined with dark, shuttered buildings. The sound of rain against the windows was almost drowned out by the low hum of the engine. Mark glanced around. The air inside was freezing, his breath puffing visibly. It didn't feel like air conditioning, it felt like walking into a freezer. Up front, the driver's shoulders were unnaturally stiff. His hands, pale and thin, gripped the wheel tightly. Mark's unease deepened when the bus slowed at an intersection and one of the hooded passengers turned toward him. Beneath the shadow of the hood, the face was deathly pale. The skin stretched smooth over sharp cheekbones. Where the eyes should have been, there were only blank, milky hollows. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The figure tilted its head, as though studying him, then turned back forward. The bus kept going. The road narrowed into a single lane, hemmed in by skeletal trees. The branches scraped the sides of the bus, a dry whispering sound that raised the hairs on Mark's arms. Then came the whispers. At first he thought it was the sound of the wind. But no, it was coming from the passengers. All of them. Their heads bowed slightly, lips moving, murmuring in a language Mark couldn't understand. The syllables overlapped, rising and falling in eerie unison. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The passenger across the aisle slowly turned toward him. Its mouth moved in the same rhythm as the others, but the sound that came out was not human. A wet, rasping hiss. Mark's fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. He stood, intending to move to the front and demand the driver stop. That's when the driver finally looked at him in the rearview mirror. The eyes reflected there were black pits, bottomless and gleaming. Mark froze. The driver's lips curled into a faint smile, and the bus suddenly accelerated, engine growling as it sped deeper into the trees. "Let me off," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. No one responded. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. He stumbled toward the back, hoping for an emergency exit. The rear door had no handle, no latch, just a smooth metal panel. The bus took a sharp curve, and Mark grabbed a seat to keep from falling. Through the Rain Street window, he caught a glimpse of a narrow bridge over a black, rushing river. The bus slowed. Mark saw his chance. As they neared the middle of the bridge, he lunged toward the side door, slamming his shoulder into it. The impact jarred his bones, but the door gave way just enough for him to slip through. He hit the wet asphalt hard, rolling to avoid the wheels. When he scrambled to his feet, soaked and gasping, the bus was already halfway across the bridge. Then it wasn't. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. The rain fell into empty space where it had been, the only sound the rush of water below. Mark staggered home in the downpour, shivering. The next day, he told a coworker what had happened. The man went pale. "That road hasn't had a bus route in over a decade," he said slowly. "There was an accident. The last bus went off the bridge. Everyone died. They say sometimes, if you're unlucky, you can still catch it." Mark laughed weakly, but it didn't feel like a joke. For weeks afterward, he avoided that part of town, but sometimes, late at night, he thought he could hear it. The low growl of an engine, the soft hum of whispers, somewhere just behind him. And when he dreamed, he was always on that bus again. This time, there were no empty seats. Story 3, The Disappearing Neighbor. When Sarah moved into the little blue house on Willow Street, she was just happy to be somewhere quiet. After years of living in cramped apartments, the tree-lined neighborhood felt like a fresh start. On her second day, she met her next-door neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a kindly older man in a plaid shirt, with a neat gray mustache and warm smile. He was in his front yard tending to a row of bright marigolds when Sarah walked by with a box in her arms. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. "If you ever need anything, I'm right next door." Over the next 2 weeks, they chatted now and then. He told her about his late wife, about the cats he used to have, about the summer storms that rolled through like clockwork. Sometimes, she'd see him sitting on his porch in the evenings, sipping tea. Then, one morning, Sarah saw a for sale sign planted in his front yard. Confused, she walked over later that day to ask him about it, but his house looked different. Shutters closed, curtains drawn. She knocked, but no one answered. 2 weeks later, a moving truck arrived, followed by a family of 4. When she asked the mother if Mr. Thompson had moved far, the woman looked puzzled. "Mr. Thompson, we bought this place from the bank. The previous owner passed away last year." Sarah felt a chill. "That's impossible. I've been talking to him for weeks." The woman shook her head. "Ma'am, the last owner died of a heart attack in February. Place sat empty until we bought it." That night, Sarah went online. It didn't take long to find an obituary. George Allen Thompson, age 72. The photo was unmistakable. The same neat mustache, same kind eyes. The date of death was 6 months before she had even moved in. She told herself it was a coincidence, maybe a relative who looked similar. Still, unease settled over her. A few nights later, Sarah woke around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. Passing by her living room window, she froze. Across the street, illuminated by the pale glow of the street lamp, Mr. Thompson was standing in his yard. Only, it wasn't quite him. His skin looked bluish, almost translucent, and his shirt hung loosely on his frame as if he'd lost weight. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on her house. Sarah dropped to the floor, heart racing. When she peeked out again, he was gone. The next morning, she decided to tell the new neighbors what she'd seen. She knocked on their door, but when the father answered, his expression darkened. "Don't joke about that," he said. "Our little girl's been saying she sees an old man in the yard at night. We thought she was just having nightmares." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but her voice shook. "I'm not joking." That night she locked every door and drew the curtains. But just after midnight she woke to the sound of soft tapping. Not at her door, but at her bedroom window. She lay frozen, listening. The tapping came again, followed by a faint voice. Sarah, it was barely above a whisper, but it carried the same gentle tone she'd heard in her neighbor's greetings. Against every instinct she pulled the curtain back. Mr. Thompson was there, inches away, his face pale and lips trembling. His eyes, once warm, were wide and pleading. His breath fogged the glass. "Help me," he mouthed. Sarah stumbled back, heart hammering. When she looked again, he was gone. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, she spoke to an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. The woman listened quietly, then sighed. "They never found his body," she said. "Had a closed casket funeral. Some say he's still looking for something." Sarah moved out a month later. She didn't tell the realtor why she left so suddenly, but sometimes even in her new apartment across town, she swears, she catches glimpses of him in reflective surfaces. A faint figure standing just behind her in the glass of a bus stop, in the window of a cafe, in the mirror at home, when she turns away too quickly. Always watching, always waiting. And sometimes, late at night, she hears that same whisper at her window. Story 4. The missing room. Kelly was used to budget travel. Her job as a regional sales rep meant she was in a different city every week, and cheap hotels were part of the deal. She never minded. Most of the time, a bed was a bed. That Tuesday, she checked into the Westin Inn, a squat beige building off the interstate. The carpet in the lobby smelled faintly of mildew, and the front desk clerk barely looked up from his computer as he handed her the keycard. "Room 214, he said. "End of the 2nd floor." Room 214 was narrow and unusually long, with the bed pushed far back against the wall. The single window overlooked a parking lot. The wallpaper was peeling at the edges, but Kelly was too tired to care. She showered, answered a few work emails, and fell asleep. The next morning, she had a strange feeling when she woke. The bathroom door was on the opposite side of the room from where she remembered. She laughed it off, telling herself she must have been exhausted last night. But the next evening, after another long day of meetings, something else was wrong. The bed was now centered under the window, not against the sidewall. She was certain she hadn't moved it. She went to the front desk. "Has anyone been in my room?" she asked. The clerk glanced at her room number. "No, ma'am, no one's touched it. Because the furniture, the room's the same as it's always been." He interrupted. "Been here for years." Kelly went back upstairs, uneasy. She told herself she'd just misremembered that night. She woke to the sound of soft knocking. It seemed to come from the wall beside her bed. Half asleep, she pressed her ear to the wallpaper. The knocking stopped. In its place she heard something else, muffled sobbing. Kelly sat frozen until it faded. The following night, she returned to her room late. Her keycard worked, but when she stepped inside, the space was different again. The bed was gone entirely, replaced by a plain wooden chair in the middle of the floor, and there was a new door on the far wall. She stared at it. It was painted the same beige as the rest of the room, with no handle, just a keyhole. She bent down, peering through. It was pitch black inside, but she thought she saw movement, a slow, shifting shape. Just out of focus, her phone buzzed suddenly. making her jump. When she looked back at the door, it was gone. The bed was back where it had been that morning. Kelly barely slept. On the fifth night, she awoke to find 3 doors along the walls that hadn't been there before. One was where the bathroom should be. Another was near the head of her bed. The third was directly opposite her. From behind them came faint sounds, crying, scratching, something dragging across the floor. She got out of bed, moving toward the bathroom door. When she opened it, there was no bathroom, just a long, dim hallway lined with dozens of identical rooms. Every door bore the number 214. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. "Hello," she called. A figure stepped out of one of the far rooms. At first she thought it was a guest, until it began to crawl toward her on hands and knees. Its limbs moved too quickly, joints bending at odd angles. Its head hung low, hair hiding its face. It whispered her name. Kelly slammed the door shut and backed away, heart racing. But now the other 2 doors were rattling violently, as if something inside was trying to get out. She grabbed her bag and fled into the hall outside her room, or what should have been the hall. Instead, she stepped straight into another room, 214. The same bed, the same peeling wallpaper, and the same 3 doors. She turned back, but the door she'd entered through was gone. For what felt like hours, she wandered through variations of room 242, each one slightly different. Sometimes the walls were closer, sometimes the ceiling lower, sometimes the ceiling lower, sometimes the furniture missing entirely. In one, the window was bricked over. In another, the bed was soaked in something dark. The knocking followed her from room to room. Sometimes it was behind a wall, sometimes from under the floor. Eventually, exhaustion overwhelmed her. She sank into a chair in one of the rooms and closed her eyes. When she woke, she was lying in the original room 214, sunlight streaming through the window. Her bag was on the floor. The bathroom was back in its usual place. She laughed shakily, telling herself it had been a nightmare brought on by stress. She checked out that morning, barely acknowledging the clerk. Later, scrolling through local news on her phone, a headline caught her eye. Western Inn closes after multiple missing person reports. The article mentioned that several guests who stayed in room 214 had never been seen again. Hotel records showed their key cards had never been used to leave the building. Kelly's stomach turned cold. She shut her phone off and never drove that stretch of interstate again. But sometimes, in unfamiliar hotels, she'll awake in the night to find the bathroom door on the wrong side of the room, and somewhere beyond it, something is knocking. Story 5. The voice beneath the floor. Emily hadn't wanted to move into the old farmhouse. It was drafty, the paint was peeling, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. But after her divorce, it was all she could afford for herself and her 7-year-old son, Liam. Liam seemed to like it at first. He spent hours exploring the overgrown backyard, chasing bugs and pretending the barn was a castle. But after the first week, his mood changed. "The man under my floor talks to me at night," he said one morning over breakfast. Emily paused mid-sip of coffee. "What man?" "The one in my room," Liam said matter-of-factly. "He whispers to me through the cracks." She forced a smile. "Sounds like you had a dream, buddy." But that night, when Emily passed by his room, she heard it too, a faint, rhythmic tapping from somewhere beneath the floorboards. She got down on her knees and pressed her ear to the wood. The tapping stopped. A few days later, she noticed small holes drilled into the floorboards near Liam's bed. Neat, clean circles, as if made with a power tool. "Did you do this?" she asked him. He shook his head. "The man made them so he can see me." Emily told herself it had to be mice. Or maybe the house settling. But the unease lingered. One night she woke to the sound of Liam talking. His voice was low, like he was whispering to someone. When she opened his door, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his face close to the holes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Listening," he said. "He says I should come down and play. He says it's fun." Emily pulled him into bed and told him not to talk to the man anymore. But his expression was stubborn. "He's lonely," Liam said softly. The next day she went down to the basement. It was damp and smelled of mildew. The ceiling was just exposed beams and the underside of the floorboards above. She ran her hand along the beam beneath Liam's room and froze. The holes were there, lined up perfectly, and each had a faint smudge of something dark around the edges. That night, she did a little digging online. The farmhouse had once belonged to a man named Harold Voss, who'd disappeared in the 1980s after police began investigating the disappearances of 3 local children. His body was never found. The articles mentioned an unfinished basement. This basement, where the children were believed to have been kept. Emily shut her laptop and locked every door. For a few nights, the house was quiet. Then the tapping returned, louder now, accompanied by a low, rasping voice. Emily couldn't make out the words, but Liam could. "He says you don't like him," Liam told her one morning. "He says you should let him meet me." Emily called a friend to stay over, but by nightfall her friend had to leave for an emergency. Emily sat up in bed with every light on, listening. Sometime after midnight, she heard floorboards creak in Liam's room. When she rushed in, he was kneeling by the holes again, prying at the edges of a loose board with a screwdriver. "Liam," she shouted, grabbing him. From the opening, a pale hand shot up, fingers long and thin, nails cracked and yellowed. They brushed Liam's ankle. Emily yanked him back and kicked the board down. The hand withdrew slowly, almost deliberately. She dragged Liam into her bedroom and locked the door. They didn't sleep. At dawn, she packed their things and drove away without looking back. She found a small apartment in the city. But a week after moving in, Liam came into the kitchen and said, "The man found me." Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "He taps on my floor at night," Liam said with a smile. "He says he can get in anywhere."